All right, we had an insane final day of World Cup qualification, and there's so much in it that I want to talk about. I'm actually going to divide our World Cup qualifying breakdown into two different parts. Okay, so this is going to be, as you probably noticed from the thumbnail in the title, this is going to be the African World Cup qualifying part, and then we're going to do everything else elsewhere. But there was just so many things happening, and when I say elsewhere, I mean like the next video. Okay, so it's not going to be that bad, right? But there's so many things happening in African World Cup qualifying. I wanted to give it its own video. Also, aware of the fact the last time I did this, we went in just such a ridiculous order that I'm going to try and keep things in order this time. But I am so fucking amped when it comes to World Cup qualifying. That is hard for me to do, to actually be able to keep these things in order. Group A in Africa. This one is one of the two groups I would consider fairly settled at this point. So there are two nations out of the 9.5 qualifying spots out of Africa that'll be feeling really good right about now. And one of them is freaking Egypt. They are feeling absolutely fantastic. They are cruising on 16 points from 6 matches, picked up 2 wins in this window, including a big win over Sierra Leone that if they lost, it would have been very uncomfortable. And they only won that match 1-0. Okay, Sierra Leone's actually put up a very good qualifying effort. This is an Egypt team that is starting somebody like Mo Salah against Kai Kamara, MLS legend up there for Sierra Leone, trying to lead the boys. Burkina Faso did get 2 wins in this window to try and put together some sort of a chase, but they needed Egypt to slip up, and that just did not happen. Guinea-Bissau has faded a little bit. Ethiopia's done better than probably would have been expected. What Burkina Faso is basically focused on now, with 4 matches to go, is they're trying to finish in second position. Now, I need you to follow me on this one, because I'm only going to say it once. World Cup qualifying in Africa, finishing in first is all that matters. There are 9 groups and 9 automatic spots qualifying for the World Cup, but what Africa does have is a half spot. Okay, and that half spot is a spot in the Interconfederation playoff, the Intercontinental World Cup playoff, which is where the last couple of World Cup spots are decided. That's where that is. Now, Africa, the problem is it has 9 groups, so there are 9 second place teams. All 9 of those second place teams are put in a table based off the number of points they got in the group stage. The top 4 will be taken from that table and stay alive, which is what Burkina Faso is going to be trying to get to. And if they can win a couple of matches, that's totally possible. This is the first time this World Cup qualifying format has ever existed. And as a result, we don't really know what the point threshold is necessarily going to be, what the average point threshold is going to be a top 4 team in second place. All you can do is, hope that you can win a couple more matches and maybe you can get into that top 4 out of 9. But again, less than 50% of the second place teams are even in that top 4. And if you're in the top 4, you go into a 4-team playoff. Classic bracket, like a Final Four. 1 versus 4, 3 versus 2, boom. You play that whole playoff through the final, so you end up with 1 team. That's the team that goes to the Intercontinental playoff, and then you have to play against whoever. Venezuela, Iraq, New Caledonia, whoever shows up from all the other continents except Europe. A couple of teams from CONCACAF will be there as well. And if you are able to claim one of the last 2 spots from that, then you go to the World Cup. So finishing second keeps you alive, but it's just like a really faint glimmer of hope off on the horizon. That's what Burkina Faso is looking at right now, unless Egypt slips up. Now, there is, of course, one more possibility for Egypt to slip up. They do play against Burkina Faso on the road. If Burkina Faso can win that match, then any other slip from Egypt would be a problem. But the only other road match they have is against Djibouti, which Egypt could probably beat them with their C team. And then they're at home against Guinea-Bissau and Ethiopia. So they've already handled Sierra Leone, which is the next best team outside Burkina Faso in this group. I'd be very surprised if Egypt bottled it. In Group B, we start to get into the absolute spicy stuff, the hot tamales. Group B sees Dr. Congo miraculously emerge on the heels of 3 straight wins over Togo, South Sudan, and Mauritania at the top of the group. And now that's not the easiest thing to do. Of course, Mauritania did make it to the Africa Cup of Nations last time, but there's a reason DR Congo was able to make the jump with this huge 2-0 win against the Northwest African nation of Mauritania. And that's because this happened. Sudan, with a crucial misstep against South Sudan. Absolutely brutal. The first match of this window was a huge 0-0 draw for Sudan against freaking Senegal. All right, Sudan's one of the few teams in this qualifying that I am super emotionally invested in because they have a national team that is almost entirely players from their domestic league who have been uprooted by a civil war. Them making the World Cup would be insane. They have nobody in any major league anywhere. Their entire national team plays in either Sudan or Libya, and I think one guy plays outside of those two countries, and it's not in a major league anywhere. They had a 1-0 lead against South Sudan until very late in this match. I was hearing reports from people that apparently this is obviously a derby. These two countries used to all be Sudan and then split up because of a war, that Sudanese fans were celebrating with a map of the old Sudan and like showing it to the South Sudan players on the bench. So South Sudan, naturally in African qualifying style, from dead last in the group, scored a 98th minute equalizer and just ruined Sudan's day. If Sudan had managed to win this match, they'd be on 14 points on top of the group, and so they went from the elation of being able to get the draw against Senegal that kept them top of the group to now drawing against their hated rival, who they beat 3-0 on the road, by the way. They went to South Sudan and beat them 3-0. Their home matches are in Benghazi and Libya because they can't play in Sudan, and they ended up blowing it after going ahead 1-0. Just an incredibly bitter pill to swallow for Sudan. Senegal, meanwhile, pulled off a win against a stubborn Togo team who's managed 4 draws in 6 matches, but not this one. So Senegal, because of those dropped points by Sudan, is actually in a good position. They've got 4 matches left. There is a match against DR Congo coming up. The next match for Senegal is Sudan. So if they win that match at home, Sudan is going to be kind of pushed away to the side now, and Senegal will be able to put together a chase for Dr. Congo. But DR Congo, which made the World Cup once as Zaire, and I think 1970 or 1974, they are now in control of this group. And as long as they can avoid a defeat in their matchup against Senegal in the last 4 matches, they control their own destiny entirely. In Group C, we're looking at South Africa at the top of the group, and all of a sudden, the way all of the cookies crumbled here, South Africa might be in that comfortable position. The only reason I'm not putting them there is because if you go all the way down to 4th, Nigeria is there. But Nigeria just blew it against Zimbabwe, who's literally bottom of the group. This group is so much fun, but it could have been even more fun. Okay, Victor Osimhen scored in the 74th minute to put Nigeria up 1-0. It looked like, even though they weren't winning impressively, they were going to put together back-to-back wins after winning at Rwanda. It would be their first 2 wins in qualifying, and they would be putting the train back on the tracks, as you say. But now they failed to put Zimbabwe away, and Chirewa comes in, he scores. It was amazing. We watched this goal on stream. Okay, how quiet the stadium got. Absolutely amazing. They were stunned. Nigerians and Nigerian fans and players, they can't believe that this is happening, that they managed to not win against Zimbabwe. They've played 6 World Cup qualifying matches. They have 4 draws against teams. They've drawn Zimbabwe both freaking times. They lost to Benin. They drew Lesotho at the start of this qualifying. Like, I can't even, I don't, it boggles the mind what odds you would have gotten betting on that at the start of World Cup qualifying. It's unbelievable. But a couple of other teams bottled their chance. Benin had a showdown against South Africa that if they won, they would have been top of the group, but they blew it at home, 2-0, couple of second-half goals for Bafana. And then Rwanda, all of a sudden, is sitting there, and the way everything's falling, Nigeria is not winning. Benin is losing. That opens it up for Rwanda to make a run at second place. They're playing against Lesotho. Lesotho scores in the 82nd minute on a bicycle kick cross that gets, volleyed in. I mean, like an absolutely insane goal from Lesotho to level it at 1. So Rwanda blows their chance to try and chase this down. Look at the draw column in this group. South Africa's kept its head above the fray with 3 consecutive wins, and the entire rest of the group is just evaporated around them. Now they're sitting there 5 points clear with 4 matches to go. Nigeria is 6 points out. They're in 4th. They have a chance to claw their way into 2nd, but as we talked about earlier in this video, that's no guarantee of anything. Then in Group D, we have another unfamiliar-looking team sitting top of the group, and that would be Cape Verde. Cape Verde's on 3 straight wins, and they rounded out a very important win against Angola in this last set of matches. Okay, they were up 1-0, but they got pushed. Angola at home scored to make it 1-1. And if you look at this table, an Angola win would have put them on 10 points. It would have knocked Cape Verde down to 10, and it would have kept both of those teams alive, but given a lifeline to Cameroon. Cape Verde managed to turn that around, the momentum that Angola got from that goal, win it 2-1 on the road, and now we have a nation that's never been to a World Cup sitting top of their group with 4 to go. But of course, there is a pending match against Cameroon, who figured it out and beat Libya 3-1. That was a huge trap game, especially considering they drew against, I've been saying Eswatini, it's Eswatini. I have now learned the pronunciation from you guys, but they drew against Eswatini, and that was a little scary for them. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. That was a little scary. But you know, let's say that they lose to Libya, right? They're on 9 points, and then Libya's on 11. You can see how that was a real pivotal game for Cameroon, especially considering how well Libya's played recently. But it was not to be for the Libyans. Cameroon delivered a performance exactly when it needed it, which is kind of Cameroon's thing in World Cup qualifying. They don't dominate, but they do deliver the performances when they're needed most, and they are now putting pressure on Cape Verde. So that match, we'll see if I can figure out exactly when it's going to happen, because that's the match that'll decide everything. It's in the next window, which is going to happen in September. No window this summer. And in September, Cape Verde will go to Mauritius. That should be a win, but you never know on the road in Africa. And then at home against Cameroon. That is, as long as Cape Verde wins against Mauritius, going to be the liveliest, wildest crowd for a football match that has ever existed in Cape Verde. It has to be. Right, because if they manage to not lose that match, all they have to do is win out at Libya, not easy, and then at home against Eswatini, which that is definitely a gettable match for them. And you would, I mean, if you blow it in that match, you don't deserve to go to the World Cup. No offense to Eswatini, they did just take a point off Cameroon, but I think they would vibe with that sentiment. At Libya could definitely be tricky, so it's not like they're out of the woods if they can defend their home turf against Cameroon. But shoot, if they beat Cameroon, then they're 4 points ahead with 2 matches to go. That's what's on the line in that match, as long as these two teams actually are able to win up to that point. But Libya and Angola are now at least 4 points back with 4 to go. That's going to be a very difficult distance for them to close. That brings us to Group E, which is the other group where you were able to find the comfortable team. This group's a complete mess. Africa's Federation hasn't even decided what they're going to do. Eritrea decided not to try to qualify. They just withdrew. They're having their own stuff going on. And then Republic of Congo got suspended by FIFA for third-party interference in their federation after 3 losses. So I don't know what you do at this point, because there's only 4 teams that are still participating in World Cup qualifying in this group. 3 of those 4 teams have played against the Republic of Congo already. They all got 3 points from beating them. But also, it's kind of very obvious that Morocco is going to be the team that comes out of this group. They've won all 5 matches that they've played, but they're also the only team in the group that has played 5 matches. So this is kind of just up in the air for Africa to decide. But if you're Niger, Tanzania, or Zambia, you got to be feeling like maybe you got screwed a little bit here, that this group was so disoriented and distorted, and that you probably don't have a chance to be one of the second place teams just because of the way that it's all played out. But congrats to Morocco, who picked up a tough win on the road against Niger that we talked about obviously in the last video with a 91st minute goal. They handled a Tanzania team that can cause some problems with 2 second half goals here. It was scoreless at halftime. Group F, Ivory Coast has returned to the threshold, but there is a stern challenge coming from Gabon. Gabon right now is the highest placed second place team that we see in this particular position. Ivory Coast 1 point ahead of them because they won both their matches. 1-0 against Gambia, 1-0 against Burundi. Anytime you're on the road in Africa, you take the 1-0, and Gambia is a very dangerous, talented team for somebody that's down at 4 points in this group right now. While Gabon found a win against Seychelles, who is like the punching bag. Look, I've been following qualifying for a while. Seychelles is usually bad. They're not usually this bad. They've given up 30 goals in 6 matches. I don't know what's going on there, what happened to the team, but they look terrible. And then Gabon managed to win against Kenya. This one was a bit of a spicy tamale, but Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang scored 2 goals. I covered that in the last video. Just wanted to recap it. Shout out to Burundi, though. They did win against Seychelles, and they're on 10 points after 6 matches. I just think that's really cool for Burundi. Definitely an overlooked national team that's outperforming 2 nations that produce at least a couple of players that play in top leagues like Kenya and Gambia. Burundi's outdoing them. right now. But Gabon is pushing Ivory Coast. The next match is Gabon against Seychelles, Ivory Coast against Burundi, who they obviously played 2 matches ago. The real match to look out for, which I believe I also recapped in the last video because we already knew what the Gambia had done, what Gabon had done. They are playing at home against Ivory Coast in September. So that's going to be in the same window as the Cape Verde game, and it's going to be an opportunity for Gabon and Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang in his last qualifying run to try to power his nation into the World Cup. But if not, they're currently tracking to be one of those top 4 teams in second place for freaking sure. Then there's Group G, where Algeria is fending off a hearty challenge from Mozambique, and then Botswana and Uganda can still pretend that they have a chance here. Shout out to Uganda for beating Guinea, a team they should have no business beating. Guinea made the quarterfinals of AFCON, but has completely fallen apart in World Cup qualifying. Botswana got their win over Somalia. They're not Botswana based off the results they've gotten so far, which is kind of 2 wins against Somalia. They're not actually a threat here. This really comes down to Mozambique and Algeria, and that was the match that decided everything. They were both tied on 12 points. Mozambique went to Algeria and was down 3-0 in 30 minutes. If you are watching this and you're one of the other African nations that really expects to go to the World Cup, that's how you handle your business. It's not over. They're not out of the woods. But as long as Algeria can handle Botswana, Uganda, Guinea, and Somalia, it's going to the World Cup. And even if it loses one of those matches, it has such a goal difference advantage because of its demolition of Mozambique that it is able to survive that even if Mozambique is perfect. So while Algeria is not as comfortable as Egypt, as Morocco, or maybe even South Africa, they are now in an element of comfort because they delivered on the big stage in that one big match. Definitely a disappointment for Mozambique to get run over like that with it all on the line. Then there's Group H. Tunisia's run out with a 16-point advantage. They beat Malawi in the most recent match. Equatorial Guinea, they're the one that's in this group that got robbed of 6 points that they should have back. They drew against Namibia, which is a draw that keeps Namibia in kind of fringe striking distance of Tunisia. But the big thing here is if Equatorial Guinea is not going to get its 2 wins back that it had taken away by FIFA because of an administrative error, then Namibia is right now one of the top 4 teams in second place. That would be a huge opportunity for a team that has only made 1 AFCON ever. And Liberia is still in striking distance of that as well, but they have yet to really prove that they can beat the good teams in this group. They have 3 wins. 2 of them are against Sao Tome and Principe, and the other one is one of the force wins that's been given away by Equatorial Guinea. So even though Liberia is close, I'm not a believer yet. But Namibia has definitely shown that it can cause a ruckus. It drew Tunisia. That one draw, that's Namibia. And then there is Group I, which was fabulously interesting until Ghana decided to win 4 straight matches against Mali, against Central African Republic, against Chad, and then against Madagascar. This was the match. Madagascar on 10 points, Ghana on 12. If Madagascar could find a way to get a result, then they would absolutely be flying. They would go ahead of Ghana. It didn't happen, right? This was the other team that really took care of business in the all-important pivotal match in the way that Nigeria seemingly just can't do. They won 3-0 at Madagascar, blew them out of the water. Comoros beat Chad 1-0. Comoros, I don't think, has the firepower to win the last 4 matches to put pressure on Ghana, but at least they are there, and they are definitely one of the teams that's in contention here for one of these 4 spots. You see Namibia's in the last one, Senegal, Cameroon, all on 12 points down to Mozambique and Comoros, and then Gabon up here at 15 points that's just living in a really happy world in second. All these teams, of course, want to finish first in their group, but Comoros is at least alive in that sense. So you'll see how it plays out, right? And Mali is still technically alive, but they had an unbelievably disappointing draw against Central African Republic. If they'd won this, they'd be on 11 points, which is pretty good when it comes to the second place standings. But the tremendously talented team that, features guys like Yves Bissouma that's never made the World Cup, in my opinion, the most talented team that's never made the World Cup, they're doing it again. They're like Africa's Tottenham. They just bottle it every time, new and creative ways, and the way they're doing it this time is just consistent suckage. Right? They're still behind Madagascar and Comoros. They basically probably need to win at least 3 of their last 4 matches, and there's nothing indicating to me that they can do that. And one of those 4 matches is, of course, against Ghana, who they lost to last time. The only thing that makes me believe Mali can do it is their talent. They could put it together, just win a few matches and put together that late run. I think they're the most dangerous team of these 3 for sure. But it just feels like a bridge too far. They're just missing too many opportunities. That's it for African World Cup qualifying, though. It comes back in September. So big hiatus for African World Cup qualifying, but then September, October, and it's done, at least going into the Final Four second-place teams. The rest, Asia, South America, Europe, Oceania, that's all coming up in the next video.